Let's get ourselves a quick Encyclopedia Brown Boy detected by Donald J. Sobelin. So the Browns were having leftover meat, loaf, for dinner one night when the telephone rang. "It must be important," said Mrs. Brown worriedly. "Otherwise, why would anyone call during the dinner hour?" What was that? 6 p.m., 5 p.m., 4:30 p.m. She hurried to the telephone. In a moment, she called to her husband. "It's Officer Carlson, dear." Chief Brown went to the telephone and spoke with his officer for several minutes. When he returned to the dining room, he wore a frown and his gun on his head. The Princess Bake Shop is not on his head. That was a joke. The Princess Bake Shop on Vine Street was robbed less than an hour ago, he said. "I'll have to go out. Any clues, Dad?" asked Encyclopedia. "We have an eyewitness," answered his father. "A man passing the bakery says he saw John Abbott running out of the door." Now, this is the case of the happy nephew. The case of the happy nephew. So, John Abbott, an eyewitness, says that John Abbott was running by the bakery. No. A man walking by the bakery says he saw John Abbott running out of the door of the bakery. "Hasn't John Abbott been in prison?" asked Mrs. Brown. 5 years ago, said Chief Brown. So, he's a criminal piece of shit. But Chief Brown, no, I'm kidding. Chief Brown said, "But he's gone straight ever since he came out. The eyewitness only got a quick look at the robber. He might be mistaken." Chief Brown shrugged. "Still, I suppose I'll have to stop by and question John. I hope he has a good alibi." "Can I go with you?" cried Encyclopedia. "May I go with you?" his mother said. "And drink your milk first." "May I go with you, Dad?" Encyclopedia asked. He gulped down his milk. "Come along if you like," asked his father, "but you'll have to stay in the car. And be quiet, you dirty, rotten son of a bitch." "I'll be as quiet as a cat at a dog show," promised Encyclopedia. He sat quietly beside his father in the police car on the drive to the house where John Abbott lived with his sister and her family. Staying in the car won't be so bad. Encyclopedia decided the car will be a lot closer to the case than our dining room. On the west side of town, his father stopped the car. "Here's the house." Encyclopedia saw a small white house in need of paint. An old yellow car stood in the shaded driveway. "There's John," said Chief Brown. A tall young man had come out of the house. He was carrying a barefoot boy about a year and a half old. Chief Brown reminded Encyclopedia to sit quietly in the car. Then he got out and walked toward John Abbott. "Put the child down, John," Chief Brown called, "and keep your hands where I could see them." John Abbott started to lower the barefoot baby onto the sharp stones of the gravel driveway. Then he changed his mind and put the child on the front fender of the yellow car and raised his hands. "What's this all about, Chief?" he asked. "Robbery," replied Chief Brown. "You were seen running out of the Princess Bake Shop on Vine Street an hour ago. The door was broken. All the money in the cash register was stolen." John Abbott laughed. "I wasn't near Vine Street an hour ago." "Why, all day, ... "Look out," shouted Chief Brown. He leaped for the baby. The child had climbed onto the hood of the yellow car. He smiled and gurgled happily. Suddenly he stood up and walked close to the edge of the hood. Chief Brown caught him just as he started to fall off the car. "Thanks, Chief," said John Abbott. "He's my nephew. I'll hold him." "No, I'll hold him," said Chief Brown. "Just tell me where you were today. Anyone who says he saw me coming out of the Princess Bake Shop an hour ago is either crazy or a liar," said John Abbott. "Can you prove you were somewhere else?" "I was miles away," said John Abbott. "Since 8 o'clock this morning, I've been driving this car. I drove down from Sundale Shores. I got here just 5 minutes before you came." Chief Brown looked at his watch. "You drove 600 miles in less than 12 hours, he said. "Did you stop around 6 o'clock and talk to anyone? Somebody we can check your story with?" "No, not around 6 o'clock, said John Abbott. "I stopped for gas and a hamburger about 4:30, then I drove straight through. I didn't break any speed limit. I had nothing to do with any bake shop robbery." "I'd like to think you're telling the truth," said Chief Brown. "I am. I've gone straight, believe me," said John Abbott. "All right," said Chief Brown. I'll have to question the eyewitness who says he saw you. Maybe it will turn out that he isn't sure. Chief Brown put the baby in John Abbott's arms and walked back to the police car. I heard and saw everything, Dad, said Encyclopedia. How come you didn't arrest him? Because he says he was driving from Sundale Shores when the robbery took place, answered Chief Brown. He got here just 5 minutes before we came. I can't prove he's lying, at least not yet. He slipped into the seat beside Encyclopedia, started the car. Listen to me, Leroy, he said. Our eyewitness may have made a mistake. He may have seen a man who only looked like John Abbott. A good police officer doesn't put people in jail without more proof than that. I believe the eyewitness, said Encyclopedia. John Abbott didn't just drive in from Sundale Shores in that old yellow car, and I could prove that he didn't. What was the proof? What was the proof? So I kind of got lost in just reading there, so I don't know if I actually, let's see here. He was saying that since 8 o'clock, he was driving the car. He drove from Sundale Shores, and he just got there 5 minutes before he came. Well, that couldn't be because the baby was walking on the hood, and if he just got there 5 minutes ago, then the hood would be warm and hot, and he wouldn't have put the baby on the hood of the car. And so instead of just being real happy, right, the case of the happy nephew, the nephew wouldn't have been happy. The nephew would have been like, oh, this hurts, or maybe been warm or cozy or something. I don't know. I mean, 5 minutes, how warm is the hood? But it said I drove from Sundale Shores since 8 o'clock. They've been driving the car, so it would have been, you know, probably pretty hot, probably too hot for the... So that's the proof. He drove 600 miles in less than 12 hours. And he said, no, not around 6 o'clock. He stopped for gas. He got a hamburger around 4:30. Okay, where at the hamburger store, they should have surveillance. I drove straight through. I didn't break any speed limit. And I had nothing to do with any bake shop robbery. I'd like to think you're telling the truth, said Chief Brown. I am. So let's check it out. Turn to page 107. All right, here we go. John Abbott said he'd reached his sister's house only 5 minutes before Chief Brown arrived. If John had driven in from Sundale Shores, the motor and hood of his car would still have been burning hot. Remember, he said he only made one stop for a hamburger and gas during the 12-hour trip. If that was true, his little nephew, who was barefoot, would have cried out in pain when he stood on the hot hood of the car. Instead, the baby smiled and gurgled happily. Therefore, the hood was not hot. A cool hood meant that the car had not just been parked after a 12-hour drive, as John Abbott said. Well, hot diggity dog. I figured out, I cracked the case. I cracked the goddamn case.